Hello, in this video I'm going to be demonstrating the installation of Ricochet's half skid plates on Polaris Ranger crew. The first thing you need to do on this installation is to remove all of the factory skid plates. I've already taken care of that on this machine, so now I can start ahead and start mounting up the skid plates. We're going to start with the M1 plate first, and we're just going to get it up into position and get a couple of the cup washers started. Once you get a couple of them started, the plate can just hang. Make sure you get a few threads engaged. You don't want to tighten anything up just yet. We're going to get all the hardware in before we really tighten anything. Then we go through and just put the rest of our cup washers in. Okay, so there's all of our cup washers except for the very two rear mounts here, which those are going to be a common mount with the next plate. So we're going to leave those out. And then we've got these two here, which I haven't put in yet. Polaris, they've put a hole in the frame from the factory, but it's not threaded. So we're going to supply you with the tap to cut the thread in that hole. I think there's 6 of them all together. And you can either do that before you start to do your skid plate install, or you can go ahead and start the plates and then just come back and hit those later. I'll probably just hit those later. It doesn't really matter how you do that. So all the cup washers are in that we're going to use for now. It leaves us one more mount here, which is going to be a clamp. It's going to be your C clamp. Now, any of our hardware that we are providing the clamps and the nut plates have this Stover lock nut welded to it. And you want to go ahead and put some anti-seize on the bolts. It's going to make the bolt go in a lot easier, and it's going to keep it from rusting and, you know, giving you problems down the road or whatnot. So it's always good to use a little anti-seize. So this clamp, it's the one that's marked C. You're going to put it through this access hole, get it around the frame rail, and then you can slide it down and line it up with your slot. And then this, you got the bolt, the spacer, and the heavy-duty washer. And the spacer is just essentially a stop, so when you get the bolt tied, it has something hard to butt up against. If without that, you could actually pull the bolt straight through the UHMW, so that's just a stop. Any of our bolts, they'll have that little spacer, and that's what that's for. Okay, so that's our first plate loosely installed. Like I said, we're going to leave everything loose, so you know we can move it around, get it all adjusted as we go down the line. If you tighten that plate down and you get down to your next plate, you might have to move it around, and you'll lose that adjustment because you're locked into position. So like I said, we're going to leave everything loose. Okay, so the next plate, actually there's something we need to do before we put this plate on. Before we put this plate on, we've got 2 clamps up front here, and they're going to go along these outer frame rails. Now on the driver's side, it's totally open, it's fine, you can get it on. On this side, you've got the floorboard plastic that's right up against the frame. And you need to hang this clamp before you mount that skid plate. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get it up and around the frame. Okay, so this clamp, sometimes you can just kind of push it in. That one's kind of fighting me a little bit, so is what I'll do. Let's take just a screwdriver, and you can just pry up this floorboard plastic just to get the clearance to the clamp through. It doesn't take much. You're not going to hurt anything or anything. Just get it so you can get the clamp to slide through. So now the clamp's around the rail, but as you can see, it's kind of captured. It doesn't really want to, it's going to have a hard time moving it to line it up with that slot. So is what you're going to want to do is take a ruler, and you want it to be approximately the center of your hole. You want it to be about 3 inches from the back edge of this plate that we just installed. So I mean, you don't need to be exact, but just try and get it right about 3 inches off the edge here. Like I say, this clamp, there isn't an issue. We can put that clamp on after the plate's installed. So now that clamp's hung, now we can install the plate. Now this plate is going to overlap or underlap this one. This is a common mount. This point on this plate to the rear on this. So you can see where this plate's been machined, it's been relieved. So it's going to just come in just like that. And then we're just going to start a couple of the cup washers. Okay, cup washers are started, now the plate can hang. For your common mount, it's going to be the longer bolt. For all your other mounts here, it's the gold zinc plated 16mm flange bolt, 6x16. Any of your common mounts, it's going to be a little bit longer bolt, to 6x25, and it's going to be a silver zinc, not a gold zinc. So anywhere you're using the common mounts there will be those longer bolts. Okay, while we're here, I'm going to go ahead and start the bolt for that clamp that we hung. And again, I'm going to put anti-seize on that. Now you got this hole here, and also, you can get from the side if you're not lined up. 3 inches should put you pretty good. I'm sitting dead center of that slot on 3, so I don't have to shift that clamp at all. Start that bolt. And now we can hang the clamp on the other side. Like I say, there isn't the floorboard plastic there. So you can hang the driver's side after the fact, and you're just going to come in, get it around the frame tube, and then just line it up with the slot. Okay, so that's all the cup washers. These two still need to be tapped out. Like I said, you could do that before and you could get those mounted, or you can do it later. Same with these two holes here. These still need to be tapped out. And these rear holes here are common mounts. So that puts us ready to put the next plate on. And again, this plate is gonna just slide underneath it like the other one did. Okay, and then that can just hang. And now we've got 4 common mounts. That's going to be the longer of the 6mm bolts. Make sure you get your slot lined up with thread so you can actually start the bolt. Come on, grab a thread. And again, we're not tightening anything, we're just snugging it. Not even snugging it, just make sure you're just catching a few threads. Okay, now that leaves us 2 more mounts at the rear here. And those are going to be nuts and bolts. And this doesn't have, it's just a nylock nut. It's not that all metal lock nut, so you don't need to put anti-seize on these. I mean, it wouldn't hurt, but you don't have to. All you're going to do is take your bolt with your spacer and your heavy duty washer. You're going to run it up through the skid plate. There's a hole in the frame. You're going to put a washer over that and then start the nut. Okay, that takes care of that plate. Now we can move on to the very rear plate. The very rear plate is going to be 3 of the longer bolts for the common mounts. And then it's going to be 4 of our nut plates and the bolts. And again, it's going to slide under the previous plate like we've done. Okay, so that takes care of those 3. And then the last 4 mounts are going to be these nut plates and our bolts. And again, you want to use anti-seize and all. Okay, that just leaves us our last 2. I have to come around to the back of the machine, so you don't really be able to see what I'm doing, but. Okay, so the rear, you're going to take your nut plate, and it's kind of tight. Right behind the differential, if you take your finger and you put it through the hole in the skid plate, you'll see there's a hole in the frame. Now you need to drop the nut plate into the frame channel, and it might not hurt to get your finger up through that hole to help kind of line it up and get it to sit down flat. There we go. So like I said, it's right behind the differential. It's kind of hard to see, but it'll be fairly obvious when you get to that point. So you're just going to drop that nut plate into the channel, little anti-seize on your bolts. There we go. Trickiest part is getting it lined up to catch the thread. Okay, so those are all started. Now at this point, before you tighten anything down, you're going to want to go through and chase those holes, or tap those holes that are not threaded from the factory. And like I say, we are supplying you with a 6mm tap and a tap handle. And before you chase those out, you want to put a little oil of some sort. I mean, it can be motor oil, WD-40, really anything will work, but just a little lubrication. And you're just going to come through and cut the threads. Like I said, I believe there's 6 of them. Try and get it straight, you know, so you don't break the tap. That's the last thing you want to do, but it's pretty straightforward as long as you go slow. Okay, that's through. Okay, so all those holes are now tapped, and now we can just go ahead and put the cup washers in. Okay, so that's all the hardware started for these main belly plates. So at this point, you can kind of just go through, you know, double check your fit, make sure all your cup washers are going to seat down. Those are all looking pretty good. So now we can go ahead and tighten everything down. I usually tighten the cup washers first, and then I'll go tighten the clamps. Like I say, you just want to make sure all your cup washers are going to seat down in the counter bores. Usually if that's the case, you're pretty good. You should be pretty square and where they need to be. If you run across a bolt that's tight like this one, I just went to go tighten that up, and it was quite a bit tighter than the other ones. I don't like the way that felt. I think if I continued to tighten it, I'd probably just strip out the bolt. And I have run across this on a few times with Polaris, and instead of just tightening that bolt down, like I say, you're just going to strip it all up and tear it all up. Just take your tap and just chase that thread. Sometimes I've just seen a few threads in the frame that just weren't fully formed, and like I say, it's not common, but it's not unheard of at the same time. So if you run into an issue like that, like I say, don't just start cranking it down, because you'll just strip the threads out of the bolt. So just take your tap and run your tap through it and chase those holes. Chase those threads, clean up that hole, and then, oh yeah, that's much better. Okay, so that takes care of all the cup washers. Now we have all of our 8mm bolts to tighten. Those are going to take a 13mm socket. I usually just kind of get my hand in there and hold the clamp to make sure it doesn't rotate. It's usually not an issue, but okay, and then for the next 4, these two back here, and then the two behind it, you're gonna have to get a wrench to grab the nut on these two. Just reach in there at in the channel and the other side. Okay, so those are done. And then for these back ones, you just have to grab that nut plate. That nut plate isn't captured, so it can spin. So just turn it until your wrench flats fall into place, and then tighten it down. Okay, and then the rear bolts, those nut plates are captured. They will not spin, so you can just tighten it down. Okay, so that takes care of all the belly skids. That just leaves us one more piece, this top piece here. There's one thing you're going to want to do before you put this top piece on. This little bracket or hook or whatever you want to call it on the frame, it's a catch for the factory plastic. And it hangs down a little bit, so our plate, it forces the plate off the frame here. And I've already taken care of it on this machine, but what you want to do is just take a rubber mallet and just tap that until you get it flush with the frame here. And that way, you're not losing any ground clearance. Your front plate's going to feel a lot better. You know, it's not going to pull it away or whatnot. And then if for some reason, you know, you want to put your stock stuff back on, if you're selling your machine or whatever, all you have to do is you can just get like a wrench, and you can pry that back down and get it back into its original position. So it's not really a big deal to do that. You're not hurting anything, but it'll make sure that top plate just fits a lot better. And this top plate, it just mounts via nuts and bolts. It's got our same bolts, washers, and spacers as all the other stuff. Run it through. Washer on top, followed by a nut. You got 6 of these. It's actually a little easier to get to if you don't have the A-arm skids installed, but it's still doable if you do. Just a little tighter. Okay, so all those are started, and now we can just tighten those down. So what you want to look for is make sure your diff hole drain is lined up, and you pretty much want to be butted up against this back plate. And then once you're satisfied with where it's sitting, you go ahead and just tighten it down. Okay, that takes care of that. That's the installation of the main belly UHMW skids on this Ranger crew. So like I said, there's no drilling at all. You know, you got to chase out a few of the factory frame holes, but that's it. No drilling at all on this set. Everything's strictly bolt-on. Pretty straightforward installation. Just leave everything loose until you get everything all on, seated, and then tighten it all down. I'll do another video to demonstrate the floorboard installation. But that pretty much takes care of that. This front edge here, you got a nice beveled edge. It kind of tucks under this bumper too, so you don't have any hard edges to catch. It's really good protection for your front diff here and everything. So there it is. Thanks for watching.